Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to the Castle Dracula podcast. On this podcast, we talk about horror movies, vampire movies, and all-around awesomeness. And this week, we return to vampires. We continue our sexy vampire retrospective with the launch of Hammer Horror's famous Karnstein Trilogy, also known as the Carmilla cycle. And tonight's movie is called Vampire Lovers. It came out in 1970, and it stars Ingrid Pitt and the one and only Peter Cushing. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have, so warning, spoilers ahead. I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the brand new Alex Van Helsing adventure Triumph of Death in hardback and ebook from HarperCollins, so look for it at Amazon or your local store. With me are Drew Edwards, creator of the long-running horror webcomic Halloween Man, which you can find at halloweenman.com. Say hello, Drew.
Hello.
Hello. Tony Salvaggio of the band Picari Shred and creator of the new manga Psycom Book 3 from Right Stuff and Tokyopop. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
And with color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
Good evening.
We introduced you as attorney Julia Guzman. I keep expecting that you're going to cross-examine us at some point. And tonight,
I think I've done plenty of cross-examining, actually.
Let me tell you, tonight you may have some opportunities for some very careful cross-examination. All right.
And the people against Castle Dracula.
the people against vampire lovers and Hammer movies in general, and lesbian vampire movies in particular. All right. Okay, Vampire Lovers is a relatively close adaptation of Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, with a few changes. The movie concerns a beautiful, well-bred stranger, Ingrid Pitt, who calls herself Marcella, and comes to stay at the house of young Laura, who lives with her uncle, General Spielsdorf, who's Peter Cushing. Soon, Laura and Marcella are inseparable, but Laura weakens and dies, and almost immediately, Marcella turns up again, just a few miles away, with another wealthy house, this time calling herself Carmilla, and seducing a young woman named Emma. But this time, Carmilla's luck runs out because the two houses are too well known to one another, and soon the men of the families trace Carmilla back to the long-dead Karnstein family, known vampires. With the help of vampire hunter Baron Hartog, the men kill Carmilla in her coffin and successfully restore the heteronormative patriarchy to which everyone is accustomed. And is this the last of Carmilla? No, this is just part one. There are two more movies in this series. So we're going to see if she gets her revenge. So, my friends, this is our third, Tony, Drew, and Joya. This is our third Hammer movie, number 3. We've done over 30 movies on this podcast, and somehow this is our third Hammer movie. That is crazy to me. So yeah. I want to know. It's our return to Hammer, and it is a real goose to the universe, the genre of lesbian vampires in particular, and sexy vampires of the 1970s. And I want to know your first impressions. And let's mix it up. Let's do Tony, Julia, Drew. So Tony, first impressions, lay it on me, Vampire Lovers.
I like it. I kind of have to agree with what Drew was saying earlier. It's kind of one of those things where it's kind of when people, titter about, the Hammer movies. This is kind of all of that in spades. But as a, red-blooded male, there is lots to see. There's copious amounts of vampire women on display, and that's cool. And it's got Peter Cushing, which is awesome. So, I don't know. It's fun. It kind of, I'm watching a bunch of horror movies, Hammer movies, it won't, stand out other than, probably the women in it. But it's good fun, and it's enjoyable.
All right. Good fun and enjoyable. What do we say? We said next, Julia. Julia, I'm dying to know what you thought.
Tony hits the nail on the head. If you're a red-blooded heterosexual male, then you will enjoy this film. If you're a woman, maybe not so much. If you're a feminist, you definitely will not.
What if you're a woman who prefers the company of women? Then maybe.
Right. I don't know, because it's kind of demeaning to women. So most of the lesbians I know don't really like movies that are demeaning to women. So I I don't know that they, but they might. I don't know. You'd have to ask them. But I think that's got some good moments, but it definitely has a very softcore porn kind of feeling to it, and that's fine, I suppose, if that's what you're looking for. But
do you
I don't
really
know.
feel like this is softcore porn? Like this is?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has the structure of it, as far as how things, it just has much more story than porn would have. Anyway, what were you saying? Somebody talking.
No, go ahead.
Oh, anyway.
All right. Okay. So softcore porn demeaning to women. I can't wait to continue the conversation. That sounds good. We need to do more things that'll cause us to have these stressors. Drew. Drew, we didn't do you that. So Vampire Lovers, lay it on me.
Well, I feel like when people think of Hammer, this is the sort of movie, this is the cliche. It's not the classy early Hammer like the Terrence Fisher films. This is what Hammer had sort of evolved into with their formula, but with much more violent and much more nudity by this point. So I mean this in the most endearing way. It's the cliche. This is what lesbian vampire killers is making fun of. This is what Fright Night is making fun of. Pretty much any film that has ever lampooned Hammer films, this is the cliche they're making fun of. Having said that, I do enjoy this movie quite a bit. It's not because of the copious amount of nudity or anything like that, believe it or not. What really kind of sells me on this movie is that the ultra atmospheric opening scene that just always kind of draws me into this movie, where that you have the girl in the shroud wandering around this wonderfully fake cemetery.
Yeah, that's
and it's creepy good stuff. And if I want to watch a kind of a hokey gothic vampire movie, this would be. I know this would be the first one I would go to, but it would be in the running. It's a fun movie.
Very good, very good. All right, my feeling about this is absolutely this is a really good introduction to Hammer horror. If you not the early classy Hammer horror of Curse of Frankenstein and Horror of Dracula, but the Hammer horror that's really sort of gelled into this Hammer universe, and which is funny because this is nearly the end of Hammer, but boy, I love this stuff. I mean, again, this is not the greatest movie of all time, but I love the fact that they make a valiant attempt to adapt Carmilla, and it really is very close to the book. I mean, it just, what it lacks, it lacks a certain amount of, I don't know how best to put it, a certain amount of ennui that the story has, but it lacks some mood. But nevertheless, this is a beautiful movie. I love that this movie it doesn't look cheap. It looks like a fairly handsome production. But having said that, it never for one moment, never looks real. There's nothing about this movie that ever looks remotely like a world that you and I could travel back in time and live in. For us to get to the world of Hammer, we would have to take some weird side trip into another universe because it's stagey, the colors are strange, all these purples and greens and just odd colors everywhere, and people behave in ways that they only behave in the Hammer universe, where noble people sort of do one another crazy favors without, just according to some strange precepts of society, and vampires act a certain way and kill nobles different than they kill peasants, and this is the Hammer universe, or the Hammerscape, as it's been called. I love this stuff. So, I think this is a good introduction to that. I have one more thing to mention. This is 1970, all right? We talked about Rosemary's Baby. That was 1968, okay? There's no reason for this movie to look the way it does, and that's again, why I'm saying by the time it's 1970, people would be going to this movie and going, wow, I'm here watching this movie that really is in its own world. It's still Technicolor. It's still stagey. I love it. So anyway, On we go.
You know, what you're saying makes me think of, like, it makes me want to see kind of a Waxworks kind of movie where they're instead of jumping through time, they're jumping through different horror.
Oh, that would be cool. I mean, just imagine,
that's Waxwork. That's kind of Waxwork too.
Oh yeah, you're right. They do some of that in Waxworks too.
It'd be interesting,
there needs to be a Waxworks 2 remake.
Yeah.
That doesn't call itself Waxworks, maybe. But I would see that anyway.
Well, I mean, you think of the world of Universal horror, right? Which in the 40s, and it's stagey too, but it looks nothing at all like Hammer. And then the Hammer, from the tail end of the 50s up through the 70s, it looks like this. And it begins to look less like Hammer the more practical sets they do. I mean, like if you go to some of the later Dracula movies where they're filming inside, it's the 1970s, and so they're filming inside regular 1970s flats and stuff like that. It looks like any other Hollywood or British picture, and it loses that otherworldliness. So I think these movies really, to me, only worked when they were Gothic. I kind of feel that way for sure, when they were in a past and a past that never happened. So let's talk about Carmilla. Carmilla is a con artist. I want you guys to tell me how many vampires are in this movie because I'm a little confused. So basically, I laid out the synopsis. Basically, what this girl does is she arranges to insinuate herself into the noble family, any given noble family, and sort of hang out there. And then when the girl who becomes her target has died, she moves on to another one. And so what did you think of Carmilla, who is the central figure of this entire picture?
First of all, she sure as heck isn't whatever age she's supposed to be. I mean, I think she's supposed to be the daughter of because she's first introduced, to start off with, she's introduced as the daughter of the Countess, and
yes.
And there's no way. I mean, they're the same age, these two actors.
Well, no, they both look like they're in their 30s.
Yeah,
that's correct. They do both look in their 30s. Yeah. And in fact, Ingrid Pitt is, I think Julia found out, Ingrid Pitt is about 32 years old here.
32, yeah. So to me, that was really distracting for a long time because if they had never introduced her as supposed to be, I don't know how to say that grammatically correctly. If they'd never introduced her as a young person, it wouldn't have bothered me because she's beautiful. But then the fact that she's supposed to be the daughter of this other person just kept throwing me off for a long time. But anyway, she's very sexy.
I have always taken that as that the other woman is a vampire as well, and that's why she has this inexplicably, sort of inexplicably her daughter or whatever.
Maybe, but I mean, obviously they're not going around introducing themselves as vampires, so presumably for the rest of the world, she's supposed to be looking old enough to be.
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
And so who is this? The way this scam works is they need other people involved. There's always at least the mother in the carriage who shows up with Carmilla, and for one reason or another
there's the man in black.
And then there's this guy called the Man in Black. Yeah, and we see his teeth. He's watching. He's planning. He's plotting. He doesn't lift a finger to help Carmilla, I should add. So I don't know what
existence is kind of hard to understand, like why he's even there.
He is completely mysterious.
Initially, the first time I saw this movie, until they showed him flashing his fangs, my read upon it is that I thought he was like supposed to be the devil or something crazy like that. And then at the end of the movie, you see his fangs, and obviously that was Dash. But he does have a very sort of Lucifer-like quality, the way he sets evil things in motion.
Yes, that's absolutely right. He's always watching from afar, and he plays a role at the beginning. There's a point where he goes up and he whispers to the Countess, "Hey," he does the part of the con where he has to say to the mother, "You're being called to another city," which sets in motion that she's going to say, "Hey, why don't you let my daughter stay with you, local landed gentry?" And so then the father of the house will say, "Okay, sure, let your daughter stay with me and hang out with my daughter, who could use some company." because this whole con works because these people are extremely wealthy, can't mix socially with peasants, live in giant castles, and generally are pretty isolated from one another because they live on vast land. So it works because of all of the things about these people's class. That they're alone like that, they're lonely, and because Carmilla presents herself, she's dead. But, she could present herself any way she wanted to. But because Carmilla presents herself as a member of the ruling class, then she has an instant pass. She's like, anybody will be like, yes, absolutely, we'll put you up. You can stay here for, however much time it's going to take you to go wherever it is that you're going and come back. And I have to say, by the way, this is exactly the way it is in the story. There's no, this much, the way the con is pulled is exactly the way it is in Leffanu's story from 1872. And he even has extra characters who never turn up again. So for what it's worth, the weirdness of that in the movie is also there in the book. And it's even weirder in the book. There's extra characters who don't ever turn up again, or just kind of, I don't know, laying seeds for other stories, or just there to make us think, there's strange stuff going on.
I think it's funny that Drew said, oh, he's kind of like the devil, because he just seemed like the whole time just a creeper to me. Less devilish and more just kind of creepy guy.
Well, you know who else he is?
Hanging out on the horse.
Well, what is the devil if not the ultimate creepy guy?
Yeah. But he at least feels more malevolent. This guy's just kind of like, man, what's that guy doing at the grocery store?
Right.
You think he's more like a park flasher or something?
Yeah,
he is a kind of a voyeur. I mean, he's watching through the windows of the castle from high up on the mountainside. In his horse, he can see Carmilla get up and come to the window. By the way, I'm going to refer to her as Carmilla no matter where she is, because that's this other one. Weird.
That's another one like Alucard. I think we can the various permutations of Carmilla. I think we can. Oh, she's Marcella, Mircalla. Like, nobody, after a few of them, you think, all right, I'm going to rearrange these letters. Wait a second.
Well, and she never says her last name. And because if she were to introduce herself as, Carmilla Karnstein, everybody would go, or Mircalla Karnstein, whatever, everybody would go, oh, Karnstein, well, that's the family that were... that were killed for being vampires.
Wait a second. Drive a stake through her heart.
But instead, she doesn't present a name at all. And so Julia pointed out a major problem, which is that the way this character is supposed to be in the book. I like Ingrid Pitt, don't get me wrong, but the way this character is supposed to be in the book is she's supposed to be 19, 20. She is kind of a whiny, she's sort of a brat a lot. She complains about the servants. She complains about the sun. She can only walk a few paces outside the castle before she must sit and don't vex me with your questions when you ask her questions. But she is at turns violently passionate and will put her arms around Laura and kiss her cheeks and Laura is always going, oh, how you do go on with your crazy ways with the kissing of my cheeks. What's your deal? And it is really neat. I mean, she's a neat character full of these, mercurial moods. And what we get in the movie is Ingrid Pitt, who is more like, I don't know how best to put it. It's like taking Morgan Fairchild into your house. I'm trying. There's no sort of weird, twisted ingenue to Ingrid Pitt. She's 32 years old, and quite mature. You totally expect that this is a sexually mature woman who you've allowed who's coming in and going to live with you and hang out with your daughter, and I don't know what they're going to do, braid one of those hair. I mean, what does the general picture is going to happen? I don't know.
What women always do. They walk around with their breasts hanging out and,
Oh, yeah. Nighty. I mean, that happens.
I told Jason when first of all, when I'm talking about the demeaning to women thing, it's like things like her getting out of the bathtub and then wrapping the towel around her waist. Okay, I mean that just would never ever happen.
If you think this one is demeaning to women, wait till you see the other two.
Lust for a Vampire?
This is the tame one.
Julia's seen Lust for a Vampire, actually.
Okay.
I love Lust for a Vampire. I think the thing that sort of makes me cringy and kind of the feel-bad thing about this movie for me, though, is that I'm troubled by the fact that the bad guy is also homosexual. In other words, it troubles me. I can't figure out what is being done.
Well, you're looking at this from the point of view of a 21st century person. You got to think of when this novel was written.
Well,
and,
it's a great
question.
Yes,
it's a troubling thing, especially since they kind of have their cake and eat it too. They play off the as Julia puts it, the pornographic fantasy of lesbianism, but then they sort of at the end of the movie condemn it.
Yeah.
In this very ritualistic horror movie kind of way.
Yeah. And that's troubling. And I'm sorry, were you going to say something, Tony?
I think the main thing that sometimes we forget as we, get more academic about it is they wanted to get people in the theaters.
Right.
So if you hear you're going to get that much Ingrid Pitt from your friends, you're probably going to go see this movie.
This is an exploitation. I mean, this is an exploitation movie. This isn't like the earlier Hammer movies. Like the Horror of Dracula and the Curse of Frankenstein in particular, were more artistically inclined. But this is more like this is a grindhouse exploitation kind of movie. This is
I wouldn't go that far
about it,
because I feel like it's
not
still
a classy film though.
It's still pretty handsomely produced.
Yeah,
it's a grindhouse.
It's a good looking.
But you're right. There is. I think that the lesbian elements are definitely being exploited to appeal to a heterosexual audience. Now, somebody mentioned in the chat room, and I think this is a really good point. It's unclear how much Carmilla really wants to be with Laura and then Emma. I mean, one reading of it would be she's a con artist. She only wants to kill, and But another reading is that she sort of compulsively falls in love with one woman after another, only to turn around and kill them. Julia, what was your read on that?
What I said was that I think she's kind of a tragic character because I think she really wants to have a lifetime partner and not be killing these people, and so she seems really sad that they just keep dying on her, and it just makes her so upset because I think she genuinely was. The funeral thing, part of it was the religious, chanting, but also
tell us what happens in the funeral scene.
Okay, yeah. So the funeral, she's with one of her lovers, and by the way, she's out in the sun, but she's in the shade because the sun bothers her eyes. So this breed of vampire does not burst into flames in the sunlight. But anyway, so they're outside, and a funeral procession goes by, and there's chanting going on, and she starts freaking out, saying that she can't stand the noise. And of course, your first thought is, well, it's about God and it's religious in nature, so she doesn't like that. But also, she just starts going crazy about how she hates funerals because everyone dies, and you're going to die, and everybody dies. And I think she genuinely feels like it's not fair that these women that she loves will die. That she can't drink them and keep them alive. Mm-hmm. So that's my feeling. Even though I do think, she definitely is a con artist because she's manipulating to get them. But I think once she has them, she is sad to have to lose them.
Yeah.
But do you think she enjoys being a vampire, or do you think she dislikes it?
I think that she is lonely. I think she probably doesn't mind being a vampire. I'm sure she's happy to be immortal and beautiful forever. I think she just wishes she could. I think she wishes she knew how to make more vampires, and she obviously hasn't figured that out yet.
I wonder if exactly. It's unclear if there is the ability to turn people into vampires in this corner of the Hammer, universe, or rather this breed of vampire that Carmilla is. where clearly a whole bunch of people in her family were infected with vampirism, and the man in black is infected, but could she make another vampire? And I don't remember from the next two Carmilla movies whether she can make vampires or not. So I literally remember almost nothing about Twins of Evil, which is chapter 3. So who knows? Yeah, so I agree. I feel I do get the sense that she wishes that one of these people could be her companion. But yeah, she's an older, more. It's definitely a different read. So, but one thing that's different here from, say, we just watched a Carmilla a few weeks ago. We watched Blood and Roses, and in Blood and Roses, it adapts Carmilla, but Carmilla herself never appears. You always see, she only inhabits her victims and takes them over, and it was a very different kind of thing. But what did you guys think about comparing this to the prior adaptation of Carmilla, which is Blood and Roses?
Well, this is actually an adaptation of Carmilla, whereas Blood and Roses is a very liberal adaptation at best.
It uses the names. That's about it.
Yeah. I like this movie more than Blood and Roses, even though Blood and Roses I think is a lot more, even though it's a lot more incoherent, I think it's also a lot more artful than this movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No. Blood and Roses. Blood and Roses, as we talked about, is absolutely, a beautiful and surreal piece of French cinema. And notice, by the way, Blood and Roses made in 1960. Okay, it's made 10 years before this movie, and it looks far more naturalist than this movie does. Again, because of all those practical sets. Whereas the only practical pieces of this movie, real sets that they could just walk actors onto, are the entrances to the castles, which are all, actual castles, and then roads when they're running through the woods and driving through the woods and stuff like that. Those are all just filmed out in practical locations. The rest of this is pure carpentry and sculpture. And by the way, my favorite piece of carpentry and sculpture is the set of the ruined Karnstein Castle, where Karnstein, where the Karnstein family, had all of their coffins, and we begin the movie and later on end the movie. That's a beautiful looking set. Don't you think? With the vines everywhere and the crypts and the high walls.
That's like I said. That's kind of the best point in the movie is anytime they're in that point. It's so otherworldly.
Yes, absolutely. As Julia pointed out, and I think you said the same thing, the guy in the shroud, the woman in the shroud, is so artsy and stagey that
it looks like it's play, right?
Yeah, it's almost as though you're watching like kabuki theater or something. Here's the ghost.
Well, and that's legitimately kind of creepy. You think about being in the cemetery at night and seeing this shrouded figure, and then they have that close up of her mouth, and it's just covered in blood. It's
that's right.
Really, really creepy.
It was confusing. That scene was really confusing because they kept going back and forth between the town and the house, and you were like, wait, where is she? Is there two of them? It was really...
Well,
I didn't
also,
quite get
there's
that,
another shroud.
Huh?
She doesn't go anywhere without her shroud, and the guy, and then there's a shroud. He's like, it's double confusing because, I've had people watching it with me. Actually, Rain was watching with me. She's like, wait a second, wait, there's another shroud?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's what she was buried in versus her kind of death shroud, which she had a hold of.
Except there's no difference between them.
I guess you're right.
The color and the fabric and everything are exactly the same.
That is confusing because she's wearing this sort of going out shroud, you might say.
Exactly.
And there's also the burial shroud that she has to put back on before she can get back into her grave.
Right.
And this, by the way, has a very folkloric feel when you think about it. This whole business of the vampire leaves, you're going to grab the vampire shroud so that he can't get back into his grave when he comes back in the morning. That sounds so much like a whole bunch of other folk remedies, like spreading seeds on the ground so that the vampire will stop and have to count them. And it sounds a lot like the fact that for some reason Carmilla compulsively rearranges the letters of her name to make new names. I mean, there's a very
but
sort
Carmilla
of...
does not seem to have the same affliction. Like, she sleeps in the homes of the people she's bamboozling.
Where does Carmilla sleep? That's a good question. I asked this quite honestly because Carmilla locks herself in at night and doesn't rise until morning. So does she go back to the crypt every day? Where does she sleep?
Yeah,
does she sleep in her room?
She sleeps in that box in the floor. That's the whole point of when they find her at the end, that they find her pendant and they remove the floorboard and she's sleeping in the crypt below the floorboard.
Right. Yeah, she goes back. Right. I think that's correct, Drew. I think she goes back every night. That's
that's why they don't. You'll notice they never go into her room after she's gone to bed. At one point, they were gonna they knocked on her door to see if she had been disturbed by the screaming, and then she didn't answer, so they didn't go in. And then the time that they do open the door, she's not there. So, but then she turns up right behind them.
Yeah. And all of that again, also completely from the book. That's what's amazing to me is how closely this movie does track with the book. And I'll tell you, the major screw-ups, the major things that are very different from well, they're not. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry, because this is well made. But the things that are very different from the book, besides the age of Carmilla, is that in the book, you open with the second girl, and she's called Laura. They switch the names. But you open with the girl who has the long relationship with Carmilla and who we follow, the Emma character in this movie. You open with her. And the reason why Emma is so eager to have Carmilla come stay with her is because she has recently learned that the girl that was going to come stay with her throughout the summer has died, because that friend was the niece of General Spielsdorf, and they get Spielsdorf's letter, and he says, hey, my niece can't come, I'm sorry, and so the main character is sad, and then into her life comes Carmilla. And you're like, oh, this is great, and then like halfway through, you learn, first of all, you start to sense that Carmilla is kind of weird, and second, you find out that Spielsdorf's niece was killed by somebody just like Carmilla, and it slowly reveals. It reveals like a Lifetime movie where you find out that the husband is actually this serial killer who and so I was watching this and I was wondering, why is there no mystery in this movie? Is there no mystery because even by 1970 everybody knows Carmilla's a vampire, or
I don't think Carmilla's widely read in the way that Dracula is. I don't think that it is common knowledge. I think you could have made this movie and tried to make it slightly mysterious and probably gotten away with it.
It might be that it's not a mystery because if you were to make it a mystery, you'd lose a lot of the vampires. I mean, you'd lose a lot of the all the business that you have in the beginning, the killing in the crypt.
Well, you could have done a very Hitchcockian thing to where that everybody else knows there's a quote unquote loaded gun, but the characters aren't, and you could have played that for suspense. I don't think necessarily that you would have had to lose some of the vampire stuff.
You mean, well, yeah, but don't they, if I understand you correctly, don't they do that here? I mean, that...
They kind of do, but it's not really, I wouldn't say this movie is suspenseful. It's not
That's correct.
that way.
Yeah, there's never a moment when Emma is about to find out that Carmilla is a vampire, and somehow at the last minute she doesn't, and we all go, you're right. There's none of that Hitchcockian business at all. We're just biding our time until somebody manages to piece together these two houses that appear to be something like 3 miles away from one another. Finally, somebody goes, wait a minute, this same girl has been a guest at both of these houses.
Yeah, that's what May was picking up on. She's like, how does nobody know? Like,
it's bad luck. It's bad luck for her that it turns out that the last girl is best friends with the previous girl.
Yeah.
She's like, well, my best friend got killed, and so our mutual boyfriend is going to come over, and she's like, oh no, mutual boyfriend's coming over.
No, this was a poorly thought out plan. A few miles away is perhaps not far enough.
Right.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah. I was trying to think. There's a movie that we haven't seen in 1990 called Carmilla that adapts this, and they put it it says here, in the post-Civil War Deep South, and it has Meg Tilly and Ione Skye, which promises to be interesting. I mean, that sounds like a straight up Carmilla adaptation, and I'm curious about that. There's The Blood-Splattered Bride, which Tony and I have seen, and Tony, I watched that movie with you, but as I think about it right now, I cannot remember a single thing about it.
It's
other
one
than
of those
that
movies that happens,
Yeah.
I'll watch
is.
it again, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I watched this. When was the last time I watched it? Oh yeah, hey, and then, again it goes away.
It just goes away. It's like The Terror. I just can't keep it all in my head. I do remember this about The Blood-Spattered Bride. That's the one where, for some reason, in this case, the man, it's a husband and wife instead of father and daughter. So man brings a girl to the household, and she sort of buddies up with the wife. But if I recall, he rescues her because somehow she's buried on the beach. He finds her sort of just, and nothing's sticking out but the snorkel and her diving mask, and he digs her up and carries her home. Yeah. See, it's difficult to keep that movie in your head, isn't it? It is a cornucopia of amazing visions, that movie.
That is true.
But this movie, Vampire Lovers, all right, the longest sequence of the film takes place inside of the household of Emma, which is the Laura storyline in the book. And we have these supporting characters who sort of spread it out a little bit. Besides the dad, who is gone most of the time, you have these two. Well, you have a sort of suffering maid, and maybe a bunch of maids, but a suffering maid who just gets bossed around, and you have a sort of a largish butler who knows his business in the house, and Amy O'Mara as the sort of sexy governess. And the governess, because there's no mystery and we know that Carmilla is a vampire, the governess is there to sort of become Carmilla's, what are we to call her? Familiar, I suppose. I mean, she becomes...
slave.
Yeah, that's right. She does. That's very well said. She becomes her slave. She wants, she's seduced by Carmilla, and then she starts to lie for Carmilla. And I love that she even knows what to lie about, where Carmilla hasn't been and who Carmilla hasn't talked to and where, where the daughter is.
Who's not at the house, right?
Who's not at the house. She knows the whole score, which means short of maybe telepathic control, Carmilla has actually given has given Mademoiselle a complete lecture on everything that you need to know if you're going to be covering.
Well, I got the sense that she has some sort of telepathic control, though, because she sort of puts the whammy on the butler later.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
And I felt bad for him because I was really rooting for that guy, and he just gets taken over and sort of.
Yeah, that was a real shame because he really was standing up for what was right in that household, and but then he did fall for the just the straight up seduction. She did eventually, obviously, control him, but I think at first it was just just being really hot and really forward.
Well, remember also that he doesn't think that she's a vampire.
Though, he thinks the governess is the vampire.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Carmilla, which seems kind of foolish.
Did anybody else notice how comfortable he is looking through the keyhole? By the way, I think that's not the first time.
Even though he's trying, he's trying to be the good guy. He does have a slightly seedy quality
voyeur thing going.
Well, you live at you live there, and you're kind of isolated.
There's not much to do.
You're buttling.
Yeah, I want to say that I don't think that the mores of the time period they're supposed to be in would have allowed for the way that these men behaved around these women. I just don't see it. I don't see that these guys would have been, like the butler would have been upstairs just kind of going in people's rooms and going and doing whatever. I don't think that anybody would have left a man alone with her that way. And for sure, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again because every single one of these darn movies is the same way, doctors do not strip women naked in front of other people and listen to their heartbeats and then leave their breasts bare. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And this is what I'm talking about when I say it gets into pornography world, because that's just would never, ever, ever happen. If a doctor needs to look at a woman's breast, he does it under a cup. He will lift up the cover just long enough that he needs to and then put it back down again. And he sure as heck isn't going to let anybody else see that. You know what I mean? It was just absurd.
The doctor lives out in the... He lives
and in fact, in the book, in Carmilla, when the doctor has to examine the marks on her, he makes a big to-do about, would she lower her dress a little bit? He's only going to have her lower it enough to see the marks, and blah blah blah. I mean, this is all a big deal. So you're right that there's
that's where this becomes an exploitation movie ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they try to have a certain amount of loyalty to the book, but ultimately they just there's that TNA factor, and it is what it is.
Isn't it funny to think of how lightweight the TNA is, considering what we would have today. Actually, I would say that in 2012 we've kind of moved backwards a little bit, but it seems to me there was a period in about the 80s and 90s when you had a lot more nudity in the movies, and the nudity level in Vampire Lovers is so quaint that you could almost play it on not prime time, but you could play it on network TV.
It's not quite Friday. It's not quite Friday the 13th movie bad, but there's a lot of
it's the difference.
nudity in this movie.
It's just handled different because there is a lot of not so much A, but there's definitely T in the T.
But there is A too, because when she gets out of the bathtub, in fact, it's almost full frontal. It's not full frontal. It's full profile. Because when she gets out of when Carmilla gets out of the bathtub, she's naked, and you see her completely naked. So no, there's definitely more nudity than there would ever be on a network program.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you could show this in Europe, and that would be no problem.
I remember NYPD Blue occasionally having. NYPD Blue occasionally had nudity that was this risque, although not this
Jimmy
much.
Smith's butt, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
It was very memorable for everyone.
But okay, well said. That's true. Well, I mean, think about shows like. Okay, I'm going to date myself. Silk Stockings.
It's still not as much like this was just straight up like, hey, well, I could have my nightie, or I could just walk around like this.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of jiggly exposure there.
I think what ultimately becomes troubling, though, is the same thing that a lot of people find troubling about the sexuality in the 80s slasher movies, is that ultimately there is an element that Carmilla has to be punished. She has to be. She's a naughty girl, and she has to be punished. And that's what I think that your average that's what anybody's going to find kind of troubling.
You're right that there's no answer to it. Also, that there's no answer to whether Carmilla's lesbianism has anything at all to do with her being evil, or if it is that if in other words, in the universe of Hammer, is lesbianism worth punishing, or is it just that she's a vampire? It's hard to tell. It's really hard to tell.
I think definitely the worst sin in the Hammer universe is being a vampire. I mean, let's be honest.
Yes.
And being, you know what, Jason, I don't even think it's the being a lesbian. I think it's being a slut. Because she's not just a lesbian. I mean, she seduces men, too. So it's more that she's just sexually promiscuous than anything else.
That's true.
Well, that's
kind
of why I was saying it's similar to the supposed lethal morality plays in 80s slasher movies. I mean, it's that you got to punish a young person for being sexually aware. Only in this case, it's a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I agree.
So, all right. So one thing that I wanted to talk about before because we're getting up close to the end of the hour, and I want to try to work and keep us somewhere within there. We talked about lesbian vampires. One thing that we definitely want to move towards then is the back part of this movie, which is what I'll call the Baron's Hunt. So, I mean, one flaw I think in this movie is that there are too many heroes. You know, is it going to be the butler? Is it going to be that guy who just helps out the two big houses? He's also rich, but he seems to he's useful to the two houses.
Well, that's the other thing that makes this movie so sexist, is that the damsels are in distress, and the big strong men have to come save them. I mean, there's a whole bunch of big strong men that come save them.
And they go get yet another big strong man. They go get Baron Hartog, the one guy.
Hold on here.
Okay.
In the book, if I'm remembering correctly, in the book it's Baron Vordenberg, and in here, for no apparent reason, it's Baron Hartog. Am I right about that?
I'm astonished, but yes, you are right about that. That is absolutely right.
And Jason said that they also randomly changed the girls' names for some reason, the victims' names.
Oh yeah, they're mixing up the names for reasons that are completely beyond me. But yes, how the heck did you? That's amazing. Baron Vordenberg, yes, is the guy.
How did I know that? I've read Carmilla a long time ago, but it's been long enough that I'm not sure what I'm remembering from the movie or what I'm remembering from the book. So I had not had time to sort of fact check that on my own. But
well, like I said,
you would know.
They've randomly switched the names of the women because it's supposed to be General Spielsdorf and his niece Bertha, and then it's Mr. Morton and his niece and his daughter Laura, and Laura's the one we spend all the time with, and they just mix all that up for reasons, but whatever. So they go get Baron Hartog, who is a friend of Peter Cushing. And by the way, Peter Cushing, one thing I really like is that Peter Cushing here is nothing at all like Peter Cushing in Dracula. He's the
Baron Hartog character is the character that Peter Cushing would normally play in one of these movies.
That's right. Except for that major difference, he is personally he's personally involved in a way that Van Helsing never really is. Hartog started out killing vampires because one killed his sister, and he is the resident genius about this, and they go get him so they can stamp out Carmilla. And so they head off to the ruined. You know, the moment they realize that Carmilla is in the house, and I think this is kind of weird, they go, oh, well, she's there. Well, I guess we better hurry and find her crypt and do whatever. So they go off to the ruined Karnstein Castle to go looking for her coffin. They send no one back to the house to go try to get Carmilla, which I find fascinating. They sent Carl. Do they send Carl? You're right.
Carl's the one who saves what's her name? The last girl. What was her name? The victim? The last victim?
Emma.
Yeah. Carl's the one who saves Emma, because remember, she's going to take Emma away, and then Carl shows up and makes the cross out of the dagger deal.
They send Carl from the crypt when they see the painting that looks like Carmilla.
Because they didn't realize that she was the vampire. It was only when they saw the painting that they went, that the guy that died from that house goes, oh, that's that woman staying in my house. Which, by the way, I actually think the painting looks more like Emma than it does like Carmilla, but whatever.
Yes. Now, do you know how this is done in the book, by the way? And this is a place where it actually would be a little bit simpler if they did it the way the book did it. They get a letter. It says, hey, would you believe it? I'm finally I'm finally over my grief sufficiently that I can write you this letter about the death of my niece, because this strange, beautiful young woman came to our house and insinuated herself into our lives, and slowly my niece started to die, and then they die. And then they went, oh, wow, well, that's our guest, you know? And that's much quicker, because then, if they'd done that, they could have dispatched Carl straight away from the carriage with Baron Hartog in it. It said, you go back to the castle and we'll go to the crypt. But instead, they don't have that knowledge, and they also have like zero deductive reasoning, and so they go all the way to the crypt and they see the painting, and then they send Carl. It's all right. Because one good scene when they're back at the house is we get to see the governess with her hair down going just freaking mad. You know, I loved that. She's like, take me with you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'll do anything.
Poor thing. She was a very strange actress, by the way. That actress is so bizarre. Her eyes are so odd. The governess lady.
Her name is Kate O'Mara, and I know this only because I've seen it, but I don't know what else she was in. She was in Horror of Frankenstein, and she was good in that. And she always plays these bad girls. I think she's cursed with these sort of sassy eyes, and so it's tough. So let's see. We have this great scene at the end where they spend all this time looking for the coffin, and now we're back truly in a ghost story, because they finally find the coffin, and it's time for Carmilla to come back. You know, they have to wait for her to come back to her grave in order to kill her, and it's finally Peter Cushing who does it. What did you guys think of the execution scene?
Yeah, it's pretty classic vampire movie stuff.
It didn't look like she got stabbed to the heart, in my opinion.
Well, when
interesting.
He's killing her. I remember Rain goes, "They have to cut off her head." Like, this person keeps coming back. Like, what's wrong with him? And then he does. And she's, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. It's kind of like it's a little gruesome how long he's like, staking her and
how long he takes to press that thing. And a lot of people
really, that was a really good head by the way.
Yes.
It's pretty gruesome, really. I mean, it's on par with some of the stuff in the Coppola Dracula movie in terms of being blood and guts type stuff.
Right.
It is gruesome, and it's also kind of troubling. I mean, all that stuff. I joked about the return of heteronormative patriarchy, but it's true. All the men have gathered together to punish this woman, and impale her, and then cut off her head. And it is I don't think you can escape the sexual imagery here. That is very troubling. But then that's why I like these movies.
Well, Peter Cushing was actually troubled by this movie.
Really?
Yeah.
So he thought that there were things about it that were, quote, unchristian, and maybe some of the stuff here was what was made him uncomfortable.
Interesting. What I was going to say is I like these movies from the 60s and 70s because they seem to grapple with these questions. There's plenty of room to think about. Is there goodness in evil? Are vampires, are vampires pure evil? Is evil enticing? Questions like that. Whereas I kind of often feel like more modern stories tend to skip those questions entirely. There's no more question left, so there's no sort of naughty
vampires in modern movies are often basically superheroes.
Right. They're superheroes, or they are just crazy bestial monsters with no element of regret. And I think it's in the regret that whole sort of frisson of the fall that I find interesting, about this whole Gothic period. You take that away, there's less to talk about, there's less to think about. Somebody in I was just following up on the chat room. So, all right. We are about to return next week with the second of the Carmilla movies, and I have no idea if it makes any sense as a second Carmilla movie or not. I just know that that's what it is. There was deliberately a second Carmilla movie, and so here we are. If you were in the Hammer universe, if you were going to the movies at this time, right around the same time that you saw Vampire Lovers, there was a new Dracula movie. Christopher Lee was still doing Dracula movies, and he did Scars of Dracula, which is like one of my favorite Dracula movies, even though it's probably the Dracula movie that everybody hates the most, which I think isn't fair. But, so, Hammer was still actually churning out movies at this point. So we'll be back for a couple more crazy Hammer action. I want to get you guys' final thoughts and then your endorsements. So let's go in the same order that we did earlier. Where did we start? Did we start with Tony last time?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Tony, final thoughts on Vampire Lovers.
Like I said, I enjoy it for all the reasons you probably should enjoy it. But it's not a great film, but, it definitely, like, as a Carmilla tale, it's not bad. It's got, some of my favorite Hammer actors and actresses in it, so that's cool. It's kind of disjointed, I think, in a lot of places. Like, there's just stuff that doesn't quite make sense, and you're kind of like, that's okay, that's a choice that they made. But as far as, like, it's not in my constant rotation, but again, I think we had talked about it earlier. I do remember seeing this not too long ago. Like, when it pops up, I'm like, oh, yeah, I haven't seen that in a while, and I'll watch it again and go, okay,
right.
Yeah. So it's definitely one of the recurring movies. As far as sexy vampire movies go, it's got all the stuff you would want, So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any endorsements for us?
I'm trying to think. I bet there is something I'm missing. Then I'm totally drawing a blank at this point.
That's okay. We'll come back to you if you got one.
I think one thing, if you've been keeping up with us and SciComm, we hopefully will have some new stuff to announce in the next week or two. So keep up with that. And and of those of you who have also been keeping up with Deserts of Mars, we actually have a drummer now and are furiously putting together a set to try to play as soon as we can get everybody's schedules together. So that's cool.
Outstanding. Did we go? Yeah, it was Julia next. Julia, final thoughts, Vampire Lovers, and also knowing that you're down for 2 more chapters of this stunning saga.
I just think it's funny that this is like the height of the feminist movement in America, with Betty Friedan and all that. It's like, and then this is coming out. I'm thinking, I don't know if England was behind us or if there were just as many things being made in America that were anti-feminist.
I think the English probably always seem to have a sense of humor about these sort of things that America, like they don't. I don't know. One of my best friends is English, and him and his wife, they watch something like this, and they laugh and laugh and laugh about it. And
yeah,
we.
I also want to remind you of. I was just going to say, Three's Company came out,
right,
a few years later than this, and I don't think Betty Friedan would have enjoyed that show either.
And I'm surprised, Jason, that you didn't mention the fact that we've actually been to one of the sets that the movie was filmed at.
Oh no, I'm saving that for the next one because we didn't go to Elstree Studios. This film was filmed
but
mostly.
didn't they show it at Oakley Court?
No, that was. I don't think that entrance. Okay, that entrance used
I think that's Oakley Court
for Emma's house might be the entrance to Oakley Court.
Yeah, I think it is.
It may well be, and we've been there. But
anyway,
save that one because there's a lot more of the places that we went in our Hammer tour. In the next one, Lust for the Vampire.
Great.
Yes.
That's all.
So, okay, your final thoughts are, what would Betty Friedan think? And I think that's a valuable thing. All right, Monsieur Drew, Your final thoughts, Vampire Lovers.
Well, does Julia have any endorsements?
Not that I can think of.
Okay.
My final thoughts, I don't know that I would start somebody out on Hammer movies with this movie because it might turn them off to some of the better Hammer movies, but it is definitely, debatably, the most hammery of Hammer films. It's a lot of fun. It's not great cinema. It's not art. It's just like it's a schlocky vampire movie, and I enjoy it as a schlocky vampire movie. And if you're in the mood for a schlocky vampire movie, watch this movie. Simple as that.
Do you have any endorsements for us?
I do, although this is a very old school thing. Jamie bought me a DVD set from Half Price Books of the old Fleischer Superman cartoons, and if you haven't seen these are from the 40s, and they are gorgeous. And I am a bit of a Superman fan. I'm not, he's not my favorite superhero, but he's up there, and I to be able to go back and watch these, I haven't seen them since I was a kid, is a wonderful thing.
Yeah,
they're beautiful,
are
aren't
awesome. And actually influenced a couple of Miyazaki picks. The robots that turn up in one of the episodes are in both L'Opera and one of the Lupin series, if I'm not mistaken.
I love those.
It's
those
also heavily influential on the Batman the Animated Series and all of its various spin-offs.
Oh, certainly the first season of Batman the Animated Series. Even the way people moved, even though the way people moved in the Fleischer cartoons is heavily through literally, rotoscoping, tracing. But in Batman...
Superman was based... His movement was based partly on a male ballet dancer, which I just find that very fascinating because we think of, you would never think of a ballet dancer being this paragon of, masculinity, but I had a friend of mine phrase it better than I ever could, which is that, Superman presented here as the perfect combination of feminine grace and masculine precision. And I think,
that works.
like, when I think of how
one of the sexiest men ever is Mikhail Baryshnikov, and he's a dancer.
Yeah, there you go.
It works. Plus, he's, this is a person who can fly. Like, that's a pretty good. I think that's a kind of forward-looking touchstone on, like, a person who can leap into the air and just go flying at any point in time.
Well, I love the way that this is a Superman that is still affected by gravity. He's not quite as powerful as we think he is today. Like,
he has to really leap. Yeah. And when he gets struck by like a hail of bullets, they'll sort of bat him back, And that's there's this great sequence in one of them where this mad scientist fires this ray at him, and this makes no sense, and yet I love it. Is that the way he finally starts fighting the rays, he literally gets in a fist fight with this ray.
Oh yeah, I love that.
Yo, Drew, that was exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah, and the way the music like raises up and so Superman is like. Yeah, well, I mean, but when it's first, he's getting beaten back by this ray, which seems to have the consistency of like something really solid, and then he sort of gets a punch in, bah! And the horns go, bah! And then he hits again, bah! And then he just slowly starts building up steam and punching, and you're like, yeah, Superman, punch that ray! It's awesome.
It's one of those things, watching it really does make me feel like a kid again. I just get so much enjoyment out of these.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Wonderful. Okay, that leaves me. So my endorsements, first of all, final thoughts, Vampire Lovers. I will go whole hog and say I really dig this movie. I've had people, over and shown them the first Hammer movie I show them is Lust for a Vampire. I dig Hammer. To me, everything that doesn't seem real about these movies, you can just chalk up to the fact that Hammer takes place in a different universe. I'm that kind of geek. So I dig it, You just kind of have to go whole hog and not make any apologies, and say, this is the way these movies are. And I like it. So I like this movie. But then I like cheesy gothic horror movies, and that's the way I am. So my endorsements are actually both graphic novels. The first one is called The Alien, the Illustrated Story, which I have not read, if at all, in like 20 years. This has just come out in a new printing that's oversized, so it's really nice in trade paperback. But it came out originally in 1979 and was written by Archie Goodwin and art by Walt Simonson. And it's a really fantastic adaptation of Alien. I mean, I know it's crazy that I'm actually endorsing a comic book based on a movie, but this is good. It is a scary comic book.
It's awesome.
So, yeah.
Although when you say oversized, it does make me miss my oversized Star Wars and oversized Close Encounters, which I don't know.
No kidding. I haven't seen those in a long time. It's not that big. You know, the size of like the old like Superman and Muhammad Ali that were like something like 36 inches long. It's not that. This is more just graphic novel sized as opposed to the 6.5 by 10 that comics normally are. And my other endorsement is called Flesh and Blood, which I've mentioned before, but I have to mention again because it's a new comic book graphic novel. I have book 1. I want to get book 2 soon so I can read it. And it's a graphic novel from Robert Tennell and Neil Vokes, and it's published by Monsterverse, which is Kerry Gamble's group. And if you don't know Kerry Gamble, well, you may know him from Superman in a Day and stuff like that. Anyway, Flesh and Blood is a series that, I kid you not, involves Dracula, Frankenstein, Carmilla, a Wolfman, Van Helsing. Baron Frankenstein is literally drawn to look like Peter Cushing. The hunter character, who's called Horst, is drawn to look like one of the characters in Captain Kronos' Vampire Hunter. It is really an astonishing, beautiful piece of work, especially if you're like a big Hammer fan. It is sort of. I thought I was a huge Hammer fan, but when they wrote this, you know, they're clearly like trying to outdo any Hammer fan that there's ever been. So it is a monster comic book series that takes place in essentially a pure, like, carbon copy of the Hammer universe, and it's great and violent. So it's I really recommend it highly.
Is this easy to obtain? Because I've been trying to hunt this down, I feel like, for a year now.
That's a really good question. Okay, well, let me look and see if it's on Amazon. See, because Amazon is your magic spot for. They really should really.
I'm a big proponent of Neil Vokes ever since the Black Forest, which was another monster.
Yes.
Also,
Frankenstein Mobster, and also I liked Neil Vokes even back when he was doing Blood of Dracula, which was a comic book series he wrote, in the 1980s. Okay, they do have copies of it at Amazon for what it's worth.
Okay,
I see that.
I have yet to come across this at a comic book store, and I live in Austin, which is just a threat of wonderful comic book stores, and I still can't seem to find them.
But you know how it is. I mean, you can order a couple, and then you sell out of them if you get them, and then you don't order any more, and that's considered a win for a retail store, because, of course, there's generally no they don't get refunds. So basically, a comic book store, let's say they order 3 of something. If they sell all 3, but they don't think they're likely to sell anymore, they won't order anymore. And all told, they've come out ahead. And that's a major problem. And the best way to circumvent it is the future, where, frankly, Flesh and Blood should be available on Comixology, or on Graphically, which is where Psycom from me and Tony is going to be on Graphically. And it's none of my business, but I think you should be able to find Flesh and Blood on one of the electronic sites. So.
See, but this is an old debate of ours. I want to actually own a physical copy. I don't want to read it on my phone.
I understand. I can't help you with that. But other than I can, other than I can point you at Amazon, you'll find some used copies there. So, Flesh and Blood, everybody. If that doesn't work, I will loan you my copy. so no problem.
You're a good man, Jason Henderson.
Oh, thank you. All right. Everybody, thank you so much for kicking off the Carmilla cycle of I'm so excited that we're doing real vampires. Honest to God vampires. And we're spending some time in the Hammer universe, which is like partially what inspired us to start this podcast in the future in the first place.
You're giving away our secrets.
Freudian, but like whatever that was, I'm glad we started this in 2040. And they were
giving away our time travel secret.
I know.
Right, that's when you just suddenly realize the guy you're dealing with is actually a time traveling version of the person you thought was your friend, and he's actually been kidnapped to the past. But that's not true.
To talk about vampires.
Yes.
That's the best plot of all. What, you're changing? No, actually, I just went back in time to use TalkShoe because we don't have that in 2040. So here you go. How about vampires?
All right. So anyway, thank you, everybody. Please like us on Facebook and suggest what movies you want us to do next after we're done with the Sexy Vampire Retrospective. And also vote for us or grade us on iTunes and anything else, because we always want more listeners. And this is Jason, and thank you, Drew. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Joya. Everybody tune in next week, and we will talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Later.
Bye.
Oh, thanks to everyone in the chat room as well. You guys.
Oh, absolutely.
Everybody was
Thanks,
awesome.
guys.
Cool. Catch you later.